What's up guys, welcome back. So today we're going to be showing off the best build that I have made with the Shadow Clone setup. This is going to fulfill the fantasy of having a bunch of Shadow Clones able to activate and deal additional damage and basically give you a much faster clear speed than you would normally get. So if you've played Path of Exile, it's kind of like Ancestral Call support. It's really cool. You're able to get additional clones of yourself using the same skill that you're using. And in our case, it's going to be Twisting Blades, which is really powerful. So we get additional clear speed, and on top of that, we are running the Grasp of Shadow. So this whole build is supposed to fulfill the fantasy of having a bunch of Shadow Clones, kind of activating extra skills and giving us a much faster clear speed that you would normally get. Now, there is one downside compared to running the more meta variant of just Twisting Blades with a rare pair of gloves that you can upgrade to legendaries, and that is because a normal pair of gloves can actually roll with crit hit chance. Grasp of Shadows is a relatively respectable pair of gloves minus that crit hit chance. That's the only thing that this is missing from being like almost a GG item, because it has vulnerable damage, which is good, core skills is good, shadow clone damage, which is more niche, but it does work for our build, and then attack speed. And then on top of that, we have a lucky hit chance, and this actually did get buffed. So when you damage a vulnerable enemy, which is really easy because Rogue applies exploit instantly, we have a chance to actually get a shadow clone that mimics your attack. Just as a heads up, the other aspects that you put on, let's say your Twisting Blades or any sort of shadow clone, you don't get any of the aspects. I wish you did. This would make the build way better, but it's still a very good build, and it's really respectable for its clear speed. That's what this build essentially excels at. You can play this build up to 100 no problem. However, missing out on that crit hit chance is a pretty big thing if you're looking to push. I'd recommend you guys to watch my best Twisting Blades guide, which I'll also pin down below, because it's very similar in terms of the playstyle, but the skills as well as the items that you want to make this build work properly are actually going to be completely different, especially on the gearing process. So basically, this item here is going to be required. It's a unique pair of gloves, and it's going to fulfill, again, the fantasy. I like to make off-meta builds, but it's still relatively meta because it's still playing Twisting Blades. So even though I will consider this a fun build, it is still very fast in terms of clear speed. So it's respectable in that aspect. It has a niche playstyle. On top of that, there is also another buff that we did get for this build. That has to do with lucky hit chance while you have a barrier. And Temerity also got a buff where it's just a much better pair of pants, which allows us to get additional life, which really helps out obtaining that barrier. And while we are able to maintain that barrier, more lucky hit chance means more of these shadow clones. When you activate your ultimate, you get guaranteed a shadow clone, but because we have such high attack speed, we're going to be getting all these other shadow clones, basically killing enemies from the sides, and it really helps out with clear speed. So that's what the build essentially does, and that's its goal. So starting right off, let's go over how the build actually plays in terms of the skills. So you're going to be able to see right here, let me go ahead and move this so you guys can see the pair of gloves that I am running. So you can see we get extra vulnerable damage, which is good. We have attack speed. The most important thing is that lucky hit chance. I happen to play Diablo all the time, so I have a perfect 34% chance. That is the most important thing to actually get. You can actually go over 100% in terms of your shadow clone damage, meaning your shadow clone will actually deal more damage than you, because you can get the base of shadow clone is supposed to be 60% of your damage. On your skill tree, you can get an additional 20, and on the gloves, you can roll up to 31. So you can go at 121.5% if everything is perfect in terms of your shadow clone damage. So again, your shadow clone can actually deal more damage than you, which is actually crazy. But again, it loses out on the aspects, but it's still very powerful if you can get it to proc. So just as a heads up, yeah, I have a perfect pair, and that really helps out. That's the most important stat that you're looking for in terms of your gloves. So the chance at which it activates that shadow clone, which it got buffed because it actually used to be a little bit lower, so that got buffed, which is quite nice. So in terms of the skills, again, Twisting Blade, you just spam that and you don't really need to do anything. Even when your ultimate isn't up, you can see I'm activating my ultimate because I see elite, and we just melt everything super fast because you have another shadow clone off of your ultimate, and then you have another shadow clone that can just activate. And again, it just clears up stuff super fast, and that's why I like this build. It's a very fun build too. If you haven't played it and you're like, oh, I've been playing this build, like Twisting Blades, for a while, I want to mix it up. The playstyle actually feels similar, but you'll definitely notice the speed, as a lot of guys who came into my live stream were like, dude, how are you killing things so fast? How do you have infinite energy? We'll get into all of that, but it's basically the same as my previous build, so a lot of stuff does have some overlap. So Twisting Blades is your damage. You use concealment to give yourself extra resource and movement speed. Shadow Clone, you can pretty much keep this up all the time as long as you happen to have a decent amount of cooldown reduction in your build, and you are using preparation, which is another thing that really helps out this build. And when we're spending more energy, it's going to actually compound with something we'll talk about to give you more lucky hit chance. And that's how I have multiple shadow clones sometimes, because it's just a chance on every single attack. And since we attack super fast, sometimes we can get like 2 or 3 shadow clones within like 1 to 2 seconds. And then we have our ultimate, which 100% already activates it. So sometimes you'll see multiple shadows on the screen. This is how we do it. Then Shadow Step just breaks CC, Dash just to move around, Dark Shroud for damage reduction, but it's mainly just used because I like the additional movement speed getting from point A to point B, but you can get the extra crit chance if you want on that. Specialization, preparation, but on bosses we can swap to Inner Sight really quick, and that just helps us upkeep our resource if the boss happens to have a bunch of HP. As well as doing world bosses, yeah, you can swap out preparation in that. So in terms of the pieces of gear, we'll go over that in just a moment. I do want to go over the skills, because this is where it's a little bit different than most Twisting Blade builds, because you need to start stacking other things. So right off, we're going to be starting out with Puncture, then we're going to be getting Twisting Blades, and we can get the additional cooldown. You can go for the improved and then go for the knockdown. That's optional if you want to. I felt like it wasn't really necessary, because what it does require, it requires you to daze, then you have to get a crit on the daze, and I'm just killing the things so fast, I don't need to worry about that additional 9 crit when I can put that into extra lucky hit chance, which just spawns the other shadow clone, which essentially gives me more than my normal damage, which is crazy. And then we're getting Siphoning Strikes, even though it's nerfed, and it's the only way to really help out with Temerity, so we're still using it for that. And then we're getting Shadow Step. I like the Discipline, just so we can be as fast as possible, because this build is all about speed. Speed is king for this build, because, well, that's what the Shadow Clone is all about. So I'll also leave this down below, but I'm just going to mention the important things here, but you'll be able to see all of the skills here, and it'll be pinned as well for the full link to the Mobalytics. And we're running Enhanced Concealment. This gives us extra resource, and then, like I mentioned before, Dark Shroud over here, and Agile just gives us extra dodge for survivability. We're running Exploit over here, as well as the one that gives us bonus damage to Vulnerable, which is called Malice. And then the most important thing is to actually get Consuming Shadows. This works in Season 1 because the Barbar's explosions count as shadow damage, which gives us essentially infinite energy, which is really good, because the preparation, we need to spend energy to get cooldown reduction to give us these extra shadow clones. This is how we're basically kind of overlapping the ultimate, but you can't pop multiple ultimates to give you one shadow clone on each overlapping ultimate. Just as a heads up, that does not work like that. That'd be awesome though. Then we have Frigid Finesse, because we're running Penitent Greaves, which are pretty much the best in slot boots, and I'll go over the pieces of gear in a moment here. And then we're running Shadow Clone, and then here's where we get the additional ability to get Unstoppable, but now we get more damage. This is how we get Shadow Clone to do more than 100% of our damage. So it starts off as base 60, then we get another 20, and then it can roll another up to 31%. 31.5 is the exact number, but you get the idea. We get to do a lot more damage here with the Shadow Clone. And then we're running Second Wind. This is where it gets different. So Lucky Hit is actually the key component to actually scaling your pieces of gear. You want Lucky Hit every single area that you can get it, because you want the highest chance to actually get these Shadow Clones. Just a heads up, Shadow Clones cannot proc Shadow Clones. That would be really cool if they decided to buff that, and it would probably be the best in slot for every single rogue build if they did do that, because it could get actually crazy. And then we're running Haste over here, so just extra movement speed, I really like it, and then the Momentum, because it's one of the best things for rogue at the moment. Now in terms of the pieces of gear, again, like I mentioned before, you want to start stacking as much Lucky Hit as possible. So in our helmet, these are going to be the stat priorities. You can get the Lucky Hit chance where you have a barrier on all the pieces of gear, if you can roll it on them after you get Temerity. Temerity is kind of like the most relevant stat. You can also technically get Lucky Hit on your gloves, but they didn't roll on Grasp of Shadow, which is weird, because Grasp of Shadow is supposed to work off of Lucky Hit, but they didn't put it on the item. I wish instead of like Shadow Clone damage they gave us that, but nonetheless, that's what it has. So you do want to get cooldown reduction, maximum life, energy. It's kind of like the normal stuff that you'd want, and I'll just mouse over these relatively quick, and I'll mention the more important things. So just getting extra life is always great to have on your chest piece, and then getting damage reduction on your chest piece, basically all the defensive stats is what you're looking for. Don't try to get Shadow Clone damage, by the way, just get your like defensive stats on your chest piece. Then Grasp of Shadows, you can't really choose what you roll on it. And then Temerity, it just happens to be really good because it gives you that barrier, which gives you more lucky hit chance. And then Pentagrees are just the best in slot because you get that extra damage, also applying chill. And then Blade Dancer's Aspect, because it's a Twisting Blade build, because Twisting Blade is still the best skill in the game for Rogue. Then we have Stolen Vigor, so each stack of the momentum heals us. That's how we get overheal. That's why we are able to maintain our barrier. And we're running Conceited, so more damage when we have a barrier. And then the Edge Masters, and we're pretty much most of the time at maximum energy, so it really is easy to keep that one up. Then we're running Accelerating to give us extra attack speed. More attack speed means more clone chances to activate. And then running Vengeful to also give us that additional crit strike chance. So in terms of the amulet, the more important things are to get cooldown reduction and then lucky hit while you have a barrier. Again, everything lucky hit. Lucky hit chance on your rings, crit strike chance, and lucky hit are kind of like the two more priority stats, but maximum life, crit strike damage, just like in every single build, is really good. For our weapons, crit strike damage, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, dexterity, those are all great stats. For the gems, I like running emeralds, then rubies. They've actually made it so the nightmare dungeons, they apply a lot less chill, so you get frozen less, so rubies, or you can run topazes, it doesn't really matter. Then for the hearts, we're running the Revenge, so this one, it just gives us extra defenses, and then just like every single Diablo build, Barber for this season is super, super important, and then Tempting Fate is also really, really good. So Barber has to be in. Revenge, if you want to swap it out for something else, feel free to go ahead and swap that out, but Tempting Fate is really, really good. And then in terms of the Paragon board, let's go over that. So starting right off, if you played the build that we uploaded called the Best Twisting Blades Road for Season 1, it's the exact same board because, well, it's, at the end of the day, there's Twisting Blades. There is no bonus to Shadow Clone damage or any huge buff that you would get from Shadow Clone in the Paragon board, so it's the exact same. So we start off with the starter board, we get Closer, then we get Tricks of the Trade with Exploit, and then we're actually going to go left over here. We're going to get Exploit Weakness, and we're going to be getting Turf, and then we are going to go up and get No Witness with Control. Control is only good, though, if you happen to have Pentagreaves. If you don't have Pentagreaves, farm them and then run it, otherwise run something else because, well, you're not going to be able to apply that chill. And then we are going to go and grab Cutting Strandum. So we go back to the second board and we go up over here and we get Pride over here. This is going to make us do increased damage to healthy and injured enemies, and this is really great with the Barber because the first hit on most enemies on Twisting Blades doesn't do an insane amount of damage, so then the next one procs, and because it takes a while for the damage to register, they're still at that like snapshotted HP count, so they still have a lot of HP, so it's really, really good. I'm gonna really miss how good this is once Barber is not in Season 2, unless they bring it back. That'd be really good, but yeah, it's excellent. And then we go back down over here to Exploit Weakness, and we kind of pat downward, and we're gonna be getting Cheap Shot over here with combat. You'll notice we're not taking any of the legendary nodes for the most part. There is one that I do like is No Witness over here, so that is when we pop our ultimate, we are gonna be getting increased damage, and we deal more damage for a duration, and it's really easy to pretty much keep up because, well, the build has preparation. Preparation gives you that additional cooldown. And you can see the bosses with all the clones, they melt quite fast. We can basically one cycle them without poison, which a lot of builds, yeah, you kind of need poison to kind of one cycle a boss within, like, you know, your resources, unless you have Inner Sight. So I do swap to Inner Sight just as a heads up when I go into some of the boss fights if I cannot, like, kill them fast enough. Oh, there we go. We got another pair of the gloves in the video. But yeah, this is gonna pretty much wrap it up for the build. If you guys have any questions, let me know down below. But yeah, it's a really fun build. Try it out, and especially if you already are playing Twisting Blades, I'm sure you maybe have Grasp of Shadows lying around and you're like, oh, these gloves kind of suck. Well, they did buff them, and this build is actually pretty respectable at the end of the day when you do combine it with all of the lucky hit chance. Getting that extra clone to give you additional damage and additional clear speed, it does feel kind of nice, and I like seeing it. Again, it reminds me of Ancestral Call support from PoE, so I like that fantasy. But that's going to be the Shadow Clone, where we get to basically build a small little mini army or a party of shadows. But if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new, hit subscribe, turn that bell, because we're going to be dropping more crazier Diablo fun builds now that we've kind of done all the meta stuff. I want to mess around with more niche and more interesting things that you guys might not have actually seen. But take care. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.